Hello, everyone. This is Alkaline and Stacy Harding bringing another episode of Fourth Level Conversations. We're happy to have you with us today if you're watching. And above all else, we're anxious to see if we can add some value to you. And I know, Al, you're going to add value to me. I hope I will for you as well. Good morning, brother.
You always do, brother. You always do. And it's so enjoyable to have this time every week where we get a chance to do these. And, I think the spirit of why we're doing these is different than perhaps why a lot of people do podcasts. I don't think we're looking to get famous. I don't think we're looking to have a gazillion followers so we can be influencers and get paid by sponsors. We don't even know who watches this or if anyone watches this, but the value of doing it is multifaceted to me. I get to spend time with you, who I see as an enlightened soul with a benevolent heart that's accomplished a lot in life, and that I get a chance to learn from and collaborate with to kind of co-create some ideas that may help other people. And we're doing this as a bit of an offering out into the universe to see who it resonates for. Someone that may run across at a particular moment in time where whatever our message or thought bubble is for that week may be the difference in that person in giving up on life or continuing to have the courage to move forward, which we all need. And so the spirit of these, what I think of as level 4 conversations, rather than really podcasts, is that this is just two folks, two guys that have known each other for 30 years, but only been dear friends for the last year and a half or two or whatever it's been. And in doing so, discovering that I've got a dear connection with a brother out there that I shamedly had certain stereotypes of because of my jealousy of all the good things you seem to have going on and your qualities versus what Jack Kerouac would call old hateful me. And it's always so great just to spend this time with you. We don't charge for these things. We just do them in hopes that somebody out there hears something that gives them a little more gratitude, love, compassion, faith, humility, peace, wisdom, whatever. So for all of you watching, for one of you watching, for whoever's watching this, I hope something in what gets said today is more than just conceptual information. I hope when we do these things, you take them as a couple of guys that have been around for a long time on the planet. You can see, what's happened physically with us is proof of that, and decide whether maybe you could try what we're talking about to see if it makes a difference in your life or the life of somebody you love.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Al. I was thinking about how much I look forward to this time with you. And I start thinking about it a day or two before we're scheduled to be together. And I'm like, oh, if nothing else goes well this week, I've got time with Al.
Hmm.
And what's so amazing to me about that, Al, and those watching, is that I know this is probably one of, if not the most, one of the purest relationships I have in life.
Hmm.
Because there are no personal agendas going on with Al and I. All we want to do is bless the other person. And
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone deserves that in their life. And I hope those who are watching, they have someone like that in their life.
Oh, that's great.
Because this relationship is truly a godsend. It is a blessing to me. I feel like I earn more opportunities for enlightenment from our conversations. And sometimes it's the words that come out of my mouth because
Mm-hmm.
you've stimulated something, and perhaps the Holy One is speaking through me at that moment. Like, oh, wait, that had to come from somewhere else because I'm not that smart.
Yeah.
So today, I think that kind of lines up with a little bit about what we're going to talk about. And I think so often in life, we go through situations that maybe aren't so pleasant or not as we expected. And we react in a certain way because of an immediate perception we have. I think of that often. For me, it's more about things don't happen in the time that I want them to happen. And so there's a perspective that I've formed around that as well. But Al, you were telling me, you were giving me an example of what the differences of perspective can have as an influence in how we feel, maybe our own mental and physical health as a result of that. So I'd love for you to jump in and maybe share that idea with the group.
Well, I was I was in the hot tub the other night, and I was ruminating as I have my whole 72 years, it seems like, on why I've been such a fearful and worried person my whole life, and how life has turned out to be not just better, but dreamlike better than I ever could have imagined that it would be. And I realized that I wasted a lot of those 72 years in unnecessary dark states of mind. And so why? Why? And so I've spent a lot of years exploring the nature of suffering because I think it is what has us be leery of life. It's what has people get depressed, go into suicidal ideation, go into dysfunctional substance abuse, all sorts of things. So dark states are really, if there is such a thing as the enemy, I think dark states are at least a symptom of the enemy. And if you're a Christian, you see that as the devil or Satan. And maybe if you're, I don't know, a psychologist, you'd see it as just clinical depression or something. But so I'm in the hot tub and I'm thinking about suffering, and I have this sort of realization come to me that there's a certain predictable and consistent dynamic to why we suffer, why we get into dark states. And so my thought was this: something happens that catalyzes fear. You lose a job, you lose a marriage, a child gets sick, a child runs away from home, a child goes off the tracks. Maybe there's a health scare, something happens. So some event happens. And since we are, as biological human beings, hardwired to be level 3 egos, that we have to do the work to overcome, which is what Stacy and I are here talking every week about with level 4 as the next level up. But in our level 3 ego, the way I see this dynamic, Stace, is some event happens that invites our fear. Our ego is grounded in the survival instinct and automatically takes that situation and sees where it could lead and automatically goes to the worst case scenario, because that's really a survival mechanism within us. Because if you are, in a cave and you hear a growl outside, probably a good idea to assume it's a saber-toothed tiger rather than a raccoon, because the one represents extreme risk, the other not so much, right? So our ego does that with situations. Something happens that is an invitation to fear or worry, and then we take the worst case scenario, and then we take that worst case scenario, and it's like a grain of sand going into an oyster that it irritates it and it forms calcium around to create a pearl. And so that fear that we've now created as to the worst case scenario, we begin to validate with subsequent stories and information that we add to it to give it reality, to where it seems singularly real. My kid's into drugs, he's going to die, and I'm going to feel like a failed parent, and I'm going to never be the same, blah, blah, blah. We go down that track. And then we build a case around it with our thought bubbles inside our head, and pretty soon it's reality for us. And all the while, we're emotionally reacting to that physiologically and psychologically, to where our cortisol rises, our serotonin and dopamine drop, and now we have a physiologic confirmation of why we are to feel fear. And that is where, sadly, most people live most of the time. Deepak Chopra had an interesting statement in one of his books that the average human being has 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. 90% of those are the same thoughts they had yesterday. 90% of those are critical, and 90% of those are aimed at ourselves. And I see it in my work. Stacy sees it in his work, that in all these people over 25 years I've had the blessing to coach, really just listen to, the consistent source of people's misery is their relationship with themselves. that they really don't trust that they are good people or they can handle what's coming. So anyway, back to the model. We've got this emotional dark state we've created out of this, what seems like reality of fear, this oyster, this big, this pearl, this big. And so if we stay in that place, we end up acting on it. We normally take actions that make it worse or confirm its reality. And we end up having this downward spiral, which is why so many people are unhappy out there. And you'd think America, being as abundant as we'd be the happiest country in the world. We aren't, because we thought it was about money. We thought it was about looks. We thought it was about power. We thought it was about what other people think of you. So I'm in the hot tub. I have this analogy, this sort of thought bubble of how suffering occurs and what takes place. And then I imagine a cyanide capsule. And I think about, all right, so if somebody gave you a cyanide capsule and you ate it, you'd die in a matter of minutes. What would happen if you took that cyanide capsule and you put it in a glass of water and it dissolved and then you drank it? Well, it might take a few hours to die. What would happen if you took that cyanide capsule and you put it in the ocean? Now you could drink as many cups of water as you want, you'd never know it. What does the water and its scope of containment represent? Perspective. When we are dealing with a situation that invites our fear, and we go through the normal trip of the worst case scenario, we build on it with thoughts, and then we have emotional reaction, all that. What is sort of the silver bullet to escape from that illusion? It is to expand perspective until we can come to see it. What will happen is, as you expand it, it will diminish how bad it seems and how fearful it seems. We'll start to entertain other possibilities of what it could mean. We'll get to a place of neutrality where we aren't sure how we feel about it. You keep going, and you'll get to a place where you can, as weird as it sounds, come to a place of gratitude for it and inspiration. And I'll give you an example. I was on the phone with a client yesterday that's going through a very upsetting personal experience that involves personal relationships. And as a result, it has this gentleman feeling like he's a failed father. And because his kids don't want to talk to him anymore. And so as we were conversing and he was sharing with me his pain, he's in tears on the phone, he's speculating how this means I'm a bad father and I'll never see him again, I'll never talk to him again, and I'll have to finish this life without him and all that. I was listening to him and I sort of interrupted this validating series of negative thoughts with him by suggesting, wait a minute, let me ask you a question, brother. Is it possible that this is the greatest blessing of your life? And of course, that's crazy talk when somebody is talking about something so immediate and real as my kids don't want to talk to me anymore. But I said, well, hear me out. Here's what I'm thinking. What if the purpose of life is to learn about unconditional love? Now, what did Christ have to say about that? That's what it's all about. What did Buddha, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, all the holy ones have to say? They all share that unconditional love is key. So, what if by you going through this experience with your children not talking to you, and they would expect the typical response of you cutting them off or reciprocating in kind to how they're treating you, you continue to love them unconditionally as best you can from whatever distance they require, and give them as best you can an experience of what unconditional love is, which means you're going to love them regardless of whether they want anything to do with you or not and what they say to you or not. And if you expand to that perspective, you have a chance to end your life down the road realizing that, yes, your children didn't understand you or why this or that happened and they blamed you and cut you off, but you were operating in a larger atmosphere of, dare I say, God, because you were giving them an experience that love doesn't have to be conditioned upon how other people think of us or treat us, and that really the way we escape our own suffering in life is to come to understand as truth, and it takes concept plus experience to equal the ownership of truth, the truth of the power of unconditional love to help us escape suffering. And that's done through an expansion of perspective to the ocean rather than the pill, much less the cup of water.
Hmm.
What's your thoughts, brother?
I think it's brilliant. That's what my thoughts are. I was thinking as you were describing that, I think the things we say to ourselves will determine whether we are going through a circumstance and we're just swallowing the cyanide pill, whether we're putting it in a glass of water, whether we're putting it in a swimming pool or the ocean. And the only way to get to the ocean is to ask ourselves questions. Instead of, and the one question that we shouldn't ask is, why did this happen? Maybe down the road, there could be some autopsy on the situation, if you will, to figure out why it happened so that maybe there's some steps that could prevent something like that in the future. But if we were to ask ourselves questions like you were outlining there, Al, what can I take away from this? What can I learn? What could be a blessing out of this? How could I strengthen those relationships in the longer run as a result of this? What is God going to do with this? Can I have anticipation of seeing miracles? I still believe they happen. I think they happen every day around us. We just don't recognize them sometimes. And I think that's maybe how we move from the shot glass to the ocean, is to ask ourselves these questions. What's possible from this? And you probably have better questions than I just outlined on that, Al, but I think that's the way that we move from a shallow perspective to maybe broadening that. And maybe we don't get to the ocean in day one of a circumstance, but maybe over the course of a few days or a few weeks or a few months. Al, you've been through things. I've been through things, just as you just described with your client. They're not always exactly the same. There's things that all of us deal with, and so I think for the people watching, this isn't a far off story of somebody else. There's something that has happened in your life, or is happening, or will happen, that will cause you to have fear, to cause you to have anxiety, to cause you to have stress. I mean, it's no secret that I've got a Christian faith, and I return to the scriptures for guidance on that. And if I read the words of Jesus, I think the things that he said most often and are recorded in the Bible are, do not be afraid, do not fear, do not worry. And that sounds so simple, but I think it was the reassurance that you're not alone. You've got a God, you've got friends, you've got family that will always walk with you. And I think that's the greatest fear. I mean, I'm just thinking for myself out loud right now. I think this could be true for most people. I think maybe the greatest fear, if we dig deep down in, is the fear of being alone.
Yeah. As you were talking, a couple of things occurred to me. One of them is that this conversation we have, these level 4 conversations about the contrast of operating out of our ego self versus our infinite self, what Deepak Chopra would call our non-local self, our soul. I think is a corollary to this metaphor I came up with, because I think we are born with a physical body, personality, and set of circumstances that has us identify with the shot glass. So the ego is the shot glass. The ego thinks it's the shot glass. When we practice this expansion of perspective to the ocean, we are no longer just that shot glass. We become the ocean, which metaphorically is our non-local infinite self that's a part of God. I suspect that the whole process of being born again, being enlightened, awakened, whatever model you go by religiously, is the shot glass not just sitting in a little bowl on top of the ocean, but dropping into the ocean. And does that mean you're gone? No, it means you've suddenly expanded to the scope of the ocean. I think that's what happens at death. And I think what we're here to learn in life is how to first try on conceptually and then have some practices like we're talking about in experimenting with expanding to the oceanic perspective of soul until we become the ocean. I think Christ was the ocean.
Sure.
I think Buddha was the ocean. I think Mother Teresa was the ocean. I don't get into comparative things at that level. Yeah, well, this one's true. That one is better than irrelevant. They're all the ocean compared to my little shot glass trying to figure out what to do with it. So circling back to why we do these things, Stace, is we're doing this as our way of exploring the oceanic side that we each have within us of soul, of a larger self, a larger persona. Because I heard it when I was a kid, you did too, of boy, life goes quick. Yeah. Hurry up. I want to get to be 15. I want to be 21 or whatever. But boom, you look up and it's gone by. And now we're in those final chapters of the book physically. Well, what do you do with that? I really feel sorry for the people that are so hyper rationalist that they only take the tangible apparent world as real, and therefore they're busy making the case for why this is all there is. And you know what? Let's say they turn out to be correct. Okay. You die, lights out. There's no suffering in that because you don't have consciousness. You won't know. But what if they're wrong and the lights stay on? You just are no longer in the body, which increasing evidence with near-death experiences and all indicate, right? Much less Christ's miracles and other miracles people have done. So I believe it's a better strategy to act as if there is an ocean and you are part of it ultimately until you are it. You aren't separate from God, you're a part of God. I believe that's a more successful strategy for happiness in life, regardless of whether it ends up being true or not. Because I'm not sure the whole premise of what is true in itself isn't a false limitation, because what we thought was true 200 years ago would have precluded electricity, would have precluded automobiles, would have precluded all that's happened since then. Our truth is constantly expanding. And our understanding is we've gone from Newtonian to quantum physics that shifts everything on its head to where now it's the intangible that's the foundation of everything that's tangible. And how we see things influences what those intangible things become tangibly at a subatomic level. So I'm really grateful. Once again, we've had time, Stace, to explore some ideas together. I really hope as we begin to close this out, and I'd look for you to close this out for everyone, that today's conversation is more than just another thing that they're scrolling past on YouTube or whatever, and that they take a moment and they watch this and they maybe watch it again and they share it with their friends and family and have some discussions about when are we operating as the shot glass and when are we operating as the ocean, and how does that show up in terms of how we feel? Because I know at moments like these when I'm with you and we're having these conversations, one of the advantages of being the ocean is I forget to be afraid, which is where I naturally live, antithetical to what Christ was telling us to do and be, when I'm not busy remembering the possibility and I think reality of my oceanic self, at which point I get to let go of all the stories of what other people think about me or whether my life circumstances determine my happiness. And if you'll indulge me, I would like to finish before you close it out.
Yeah.
You mentioned loneliness, and I happened to create a post the other day that for anyone who's interested, I create posts every day in an area on Facebook called Integrated Mastery Level 4 Tribe. And so I created one the other day, and it had this to say about loneliness. Loneliness will visit everyone at some time in their life. It's a natural part of the journey. And for most people, it creates a response of lacking something valuable, feeling sad or even depressive thoughts about the emptiness of life. But the opportunity can be to use those moments to go within and find inner peace in the temporary experience of not having to interact with others. A man can be alone and pursue the dark thoughts from the ego not having others to relate to. Or be a monk who seizes the opportunity to meditate on God and move beyond the ego into flow. Same circumstances, opposite outcomes. Control your response to circumstances, and you control your relationship with life. Bring us home, brother.
It's a constant battle for our minds and our hearts. I mean, it just is. And usually the battle is within. I was thinking about, as you were wrapping up that previous part, about one of the worst things we can do when we suffer a hardship is to isolate ourselves. And then I was sitting there thinking, well, there is an opportunity, and that is you've just described from your post. And I remember commenting on your post the other day. I thought that was wisdom from above. And of course, you relate the fact that all wisdom comes from above, if you will. But if you're in a funk, I think one of the best pieces of advice we can do is go serve someone, go help somebody else.
Yeah.
Because if you can see the beauty of that act of love, because that's unconditional love, as Al was describing earlier, if you can just provide some unconditional love to someone, it doesn't even need to be somebody you know, your perspective moves from the shot glass towards the ocean. Yeah. And you're a bigger part of the world. And that's one thing that I think as we're closing, we want you to know. You're loved. You are part of something much greater than we are individually. You've been given special talents and gifts that only you have in this world. And we should share that with one another. So we're grateful if you're watching. Al, I always love being with you, man. Thanks so much for doing this. We hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Blessings, my friends.
Take care, everybody.